I am so honored today to bring Rachel DeMille to you. Rachel is the co-founder of a whole educational movement. And she and her husband, Oliver, have done so much for homeschoolers, for families, um, across the years. It's really been a while since I first heard about Thomas Jefferson education, and here's their book. I even have an older edition to it, and there's probably more since, but we use this with our first three children, and we still have three children at home, and now we have grandchildren, and so this is so fun to be meeting with Rachel, and to finally get to talk to her and have her on. So welcome, Rachel. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to have this opportunity. One of my favorite things to do is to talk to parents, especially moms. I feel like I have a tender heart for moms who are making such a special effort to homeschool, and to parents, not just moms. It can be challenging, and it can feel like you're almost in free fall, because it's like we're trying to give something to our children that in our estimation is better than something else that we're setting ourselves apart from. And yet what we want to give, we didn't experience firsthand. And so it leaves us with lots of questions. It leaves us with kind of this void in terms of what is our vision. And we have a little sense of maybe what we don't want it to be like. And we have a sense of what we want it to look like, clear down the road, things that we want to accomplish.
But how do we get there?
Filling in the gaps can be a big challenge.
Yeah. And, I was brought up in the educational, government educational system. And then I became an elementary education teacher and graduated and had my degree and everything. And so it was really kind of hard. It is even still hard for me sometimes to get away from what I feel like, what I used to think that education must look like. But over the years have come through a large part in which you and Oliver have done to just to realize that that's really not always the best way to educate, that there's
what
better.
As you're talking, a picture just came into my mind, and I imagined cooking for a cafeteria, and how you have to buy in bulk, and you have to there's a bottom line that you need to watch, and you have to portion a certain way, and you have schedules that you have to meet, and you've got special guidelines for what you're allowed to do in a commercial kitchen and who can work there, and there's just all these rules and details and things that go into having a successful cafeteria type experience. And then you can say there's like a 4-star Michelin experience where there's a gourmet meal that's prepared, and we're talking about food in both cases, but
it's a very different kind of food.
It's a very different experience to be.
What would you rather eat?
Well,
what's our outcome?
And I'm not here to say, my husband loves cafeteria food. I mean, he was one of those kids that brown bagged it. And the day that he got to eat at the cafeteria was like, yay, I get to eat with the other kids. So, and I mean, and I love myself a good buffet. So, there's something special about that. But really, even though we're talking about food on both ends of it, being the person who's responsible for what's delivered is a very different experience from one to the other.
It is.
And it has different goals, different vision, different measure of success. And I think that's very much like what homeschool is. We kind of compare it to the cafeteria model, and we find ourselves wanting. We can't cook in the big quantity. We're not subject to the same, I don't know. Having that personalized meal I think
Probably
most
like
of
someone cook you a meal, like say they're your chef or something, and they're just cooking this one meal for you, and they're going to send it out, and I think of Ratatouille and how they send out that meal, that specially made, personally made meal. And um and with homeschool, we can do that a whole
Mhm.
lot more for our kids. And that's a lot different. I mean, what I was learning in college was about a whole lot of it was about managing the classroom
Yeah.
and managing the kids and making sure that they were quiet and that they got in line, and that they all accomplished the same assignment, and that they all, did what there were the grades. You had to figure all of those out. It's just a whole different kind of thing, a whole lot more like the cafeteria, than something that could just be so personalized
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
for one child, or for your children, and just wrapping your motherly cloak around them. I love that
I have a
analogy that was given. Yeah.
I have a child with special needs, and I've heard a lot of times uh, professional educators like yourself say how interesting it is the way that the special needs program is approached, where there's an individualized education program for each child. And I've heard it said just very recently, why can't we have an IEP for every kid? And you know what? We can.
Right.
We can.
Yeah.
And
We
while that
can.
sounds like a big prospect, you say you've got multiple kids. I have 8 kids, and I know what I'm talking about when I say that can feel really big. But honestly, there's a difference, because success in that, um, just a second, I've got a call coming in. I've got to decline.
That's okay. Go ahead. Um,
Sorry.
because I think it is different. There are a lot of children with neurodiversities that then they get to have IEPs and all. But I've heard from moms who are like, it's not, they really can't individualize it. And that's why there's so many people that have taken their children with with neurodiversities out, because they're not getting, they say that they'll be able to get this individualized attention, but they still aren't. And so I felt really blessed to be able to homeschool my children over the years, rather than than having to have them in the classroom.
Well, and it can feel really big, the idea that we want to create that individualized experience at home. It seems so much easier to measure out the same experience for every child, but honestly, it's not. And I'll tell you why it's not. Because the children don't respond to conformity very well. They don't.
No,
And
who
so,
does, right?
no,
Everyone
none of
wants a
us
choice,
wants
and
that.
everyone wants to be individuals.
And
If we're
and
made that
the
way,
idea of,
we are individuals.
very rarely do people have 8 kids all of the same age who are all of the same type. That's not very often.
No.
And having kids at different ages and different stages is actually really normal. And the idea that it's harder to do that than to get them all to conform, I'm here to say that's not the case. To get everyone to be in a good rhythm where they're each in their space, living their best life, thriving, that's easier than conformity. I promise it is. And I'll talk about that.
Well, tell me, how did TJ Ed, Thomas Jefferson Education, how did it come to be?
That's a really great question, and excuse me, kind of takes us on a journey. When my husband and I were just newly married, he was in the Air Force preparing for his actual assignment. He had been going through officer training, and he was in the intelligence corps and stuff. And the summer camp right before he was ready to get his station to his permanent assignment, he had some health problems, and the Air Force doctors couldn't figure out what was going on, so they just gave him a medical discharge, and he was done. And here he was, 3 3/4 of his way through his degree, and all of a sudden, no idea what was supposed to happen next. But interestingly, on the side, he's kind of a prodigy of a student. He is a fast reader. He, compiles information in a way and delivers it to people in a way that's kind of special. He's just a master mentor. And as a result of this aptitude of his, not only was he carrying this full load of school, but on the side, he was getting privately mentored with a man by the name of Cleon Skousen, who is kind of a freedom guru.
Yes, well, my parents followed Cleon Skousen.
Sure. I was familiar with his works, The Making of America, The 5,000-Year Leap, and so forth. Anyway, so Cleon took Oliver on as a private student. And in addition to Oliver's college work, he was working with Cleon on the side. He discovered that the things that he was doing for his college degree didn't compare in depth, in quality, in relevance for him personally to the stuff that he was doing with Dr. Skousen. And so with just a very little bit left in his degree, he literally walked away to work full time in his studies with Dr. Skousen. And one of the things that they did was Oliver was researching the educational process of the American Founding Fathers, because there were so many people in one time, one place, who were just uniquely prepared for their time.
Right.
And so Oliver's question was, how was it that all of these men and women in the very same time, very same place? I mean, there are luminaries throughout history where just a bright star rises, and they're the person of the moment, and they turn the tide of history. And these are wonderful stories that we all love, right? But in the founding generation, there were dozens of them all in the same place at the same time. And that's crazy. And so he's like, that cannot have been an accident. There had to be something about their nurture, their experience that led to that. It wasn't just a genius was born. There was a process. And so he started looking at, well, what was it that made it so that Thomas Jefferson was this at age 24? And what was it that made James Madison? What made it John Adams? What was it? And what was in common for them? And really the thing that stood out for him was that they had spent their teen years studying long, hard, and effectively. They didn't just all of a sudden, in their early 20s, become these amazing scholars who had, world-shifting ideas on freedom by pulling from this and that and the other thing to synthesize something that had never happened in written history, right? And so the question then became because in Oliver's mind, we are at that kind of place in history. I'm talking about the early 1990s right now, where he was saying, you know what, somewhere in my lifetime, we're going to have another world-shifting moment. We're going to need a new generation of founders who are prepared just like they were. That was just like written on his heart. That was like his goal, his mission in life was to help this generation prepare for that moment.
And so he knew that. We're seeing that now. We're seeing things are moving in those crazy directions. Mm-hmm.
So then the question became, how do we get our teens to study long, hard, and effectively the way they did, back in the 1760s, the 1750s? What was it that
because a lot of kids are not, that's not what they're focused on.
No,
it's like study hard when you're young, and then you don't like it, and then by the time you're in your teens, you're like, no more studying. We're going to go have fun.
Well, and it's not just you.
Got to keep your grades up. And
the parents are like, you know what? I did that. It's your turn. And they're like, I got my stamp of approval. I've moved on. I'm no longer a learner. I don't have a purpose for my intellect.
Right. I am done with my reading. I am done with everything. Don't make me do that. But you've got to, because you've got to get good grades. So you can get into college. So you can get a good job. And
But that wasn't the way for that founding generation. Not only were they uniquely prepared in their early 20s, but they continued to grow and contribute well into their, elder years. And so for him, that critical moment was, how do we get youth to study long, hard, and effectively? That was the question. Because if you can get,
we're going to need it. Yes, our world is going to need leaders.
Like that. They are ready for their moment in history. And so we kind of had to deconstruct it from there. What came before the 15-year-old, the 17-year-old that studies 8 to 14 hours a day? What was before that? So we kind of turned back the clock and said, well, they would have to have a deep sense of purpose. They would have to enjoy learning. They have to have a sense that their education is relevant to their contribution to something that matters. And so we kind of scaled this back to right before that, they would have to be really fall in love with learning. And before that, they would have to have a deep core of moral character. And so that what this kind of deconstructed into was what we call the phases of learning. And come to find out, after we articulated these phases of learning, we're not the first one that noticed. These are phases of learning that have been identified and articulated by other, educational psychologists and developmental specialists as well. But we have,
I think it's interesting that like these people and these, these people are all coming with the same idea, like this needs to be taught. That there's the same inspiration going to people who are going to be able to bring this forth, because this is what we're going to need.
So basically, it's my belief, and it's the model of leadership education, of a Thomas Jefferson education, that each phase of life has a most natural and ideal set of values and skills and characteristics that we develop during that time. And it can be, defined by ages, but it's not necessarily defined by ages. You can, for example, we talk about the years of, say, 1 through 8 in somebody that's neurotypical and developmentally normal, quote unquote. That's what we would call the core phase, where they learn right and wrong, good and bad, true and false, where practically their whole existence is 4-letter words: jump, play, sing, love. It's all these things, work, that are about becoming. What is their relationship with their family? What is their relationship with the divine? What is right? What is true? How do I distinguish between the good and the bad? That's core phase. And when we try to superimpose other goals on top of that, it can be very confusing to the child. They internalize that the values that are most important are whatever we put instead of those other lessons, because that's what you're supposed to learn during the core phase, is what is core, what's foundational, what matters the most.
Mm-hmm.
When you nailed the core phase, it's so natural as the child kind of goes through a kind of a biological shift between 9 and 10, that they move right into what we call the love of learning phase. And during this time, they are inclined to try new things, to get their feet wet and this and that and the other. The things are curious, they feel powerful. Every child's a poet, every child's an artist, every child's a mathematician, an inventor.
Just get so excited, don't they?
And then that's love of learning.
They want to learn about frogs or whatever it is. They're just so excited.
And they don't have to, it's kind of like a butterfly or a bee visiting lots of different blossoms. It's not like they're supposed to draw their whole meaning out of life out of one of those blossoms. They taste and they move on. They taste and they move on. The stick-to-itiveness, the long-term commitments, the deep roots in a particular subject, those things actually do happen, but they happen later. And when we try and get them into those deep scholar behaviors during this love of learning time, we end up with one of two things, because kids can be really pliable and very inclined to try and please the adults that say this is what time is for, right? One of two things tends to happen. They either kind of give up and give in and give away that sense of self, that ownership of their purpose, that ownership of what their education is for, and just assume whatever identity we tell them, this is what you're for, this is what this time is for. So they either kind of give up and give in, or they push back. They become belligerent, they become distant, they become aggressive, they become whatever their rebellion looks like. They get to a place where they hate learning and they only do what they're required to do in order to get by. So either of those really robs them of their autonomy and their sense of purpose. And if you look at what I said before, what our goal is to get youth who study long, hard, and effectively, you can sabotage it so easily between the ages of 6 and 12 just by misconstruing. You want them to act like a scholar at 6, or you want to act like a scholar at 10. If you try and get them to do the stuff that's best for those teen years in the early years, they're not going to show up when the teen years finally come. So bottom line is, this is the phase of learning. In fact, we have a whole book called The Phases of Learning that describes core phase in detail and love of learning in detail. And in fact, there's a whole section on how to do lots of little details, like how to set up your home, what a bookcase can look like, what evenings are for, what spring is for, what summer's for, what how mom and dad can come together to make decisions for the family and to mentor. And then there's a section on transitioning into scholar phase, those tween years where they're just sort of one foot in both sides, and then, you know, how to dovetail that in. And we have other works that help the youth to kind of own their role, that driver's seat of, you know what, this isn't going to get done unless I really commit to it. And that's Thomas Jefferson Education for Teens is that book. And then we have a book called Hero Education that is kind of a roadmap for a 4-year plan for how youth can take ownership and follow this plan, or adults can mentor youth through this, and that's called Hero Education. And we have some subscription services to help you define your ideal family education culture, to get you so that the family dynamic is cooperative, kind of like I said before, where, you know, you don't just have, I don't know, where you're not trying to make everyone conform, but there's a harmony to the individuality. It all fits, it all makes sense. Kind of like one of those gospel choirs where everybody's moving to the same beat, but in their own special way. And it's not like, you know, there's those choirs where they all have the same tone, and that's kind of special. And then there's those choirs where everyone is a soloist and they're all together jamming. And that's kind of the way a well-oiled machine of a family education culture works. Everybody's got their own jam, but it comes together into something fantastic.
Where one child is doing they're practicing their piano over here, and this child is you know, learning about, I don't know, biology or whatever over here, and this one's working on a model airplane over here, and they're just, you know, they're kind of doing their things, and everyone's learning together.
Well, and
and in family life, which is such an important part also.
Well, it simplifies it because each child has a different phase. What it looks like to interact with them effectively as a parent mentor is distinct for each phase. And these definitions really help you. You're not trying to make it look like, you know, that cafeteria model, that conveyor belt model. You have you know that youth is in an initiative year. I'm supposed to just leave them alone and let them read. That tween is in a submission year where they want a challenge, they want some feedback. That child is in, and you just you learn the principles that guide the process so that you get the Jeffersons, the Abigails, when their moment arrives. And it's here, it's coming. And there's nothing that's more important than preparing our youth to live what they were born to do, because
it's different for them than it was for us.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And what are we preparing them for? Do we even know? Do we even know what the future holds? And I guess, can we trust also that they will follow what they need to, that you can, you know, that you can be inspired too, to know what they will need.
Well,
it takes a lot of faith to.
That's where, here's the thing. It does require a lot of faith, but it all requires a lot of faith. The idea that going with the flow, the mainstream requires less faith is folly.
Yeah, and it's not easier to just put your kids back in school. It's not. There's going to be problems there.
Challenges.
You're going to have to do the homework with them anyway. There's and maybe it's also sometimes we think, well, then I won't be to blame if something goes wrong here. You know,
Wow, that's an inspiring vision. Not my
right?
fault.
Yeah.
But guess what? You don't get to delegate that. You can delegate their seat time, but you don't get to delegate who is the parent. You don't get to delegate who's ultimately responsible to know what that child needs, what is best.
Yeah.
And so
You just get whoever you get as their teacher. Right?
yeah, but the good news is it's so wonderful. It's such a great, great, great experience. My oldest son is 30 now. He's got 2 little kids. I've got a daughter who's just younger than him with 4 kids, a daughter just younger than her that's single, another daughter, 2 kids, another one that with one on the way and one little one. I've got 8 kids, and every last one of them has a deep sense of purpose. Every last one of them is so bonded with the family. Every last one of them is really kind of special in their niche in life. One of them owns a pizza chain. One of them is a professional educator. One of them owns a business that does, it's not like they're all like politicians or educators.
Mm-hmm.
Doing what you were born to do makes a difference. No matter who it's impressed, no matter who's impressed by it, no matter who is touched by it, if you're doing you, there's nothing more that you can ask for.
I think there's a lot of unhappy adults that have just worked so hard to please other people, not really knowing where they were going, but they're just going forward, and now they're in jobs that maybe they're not very happy with, but what else are they going to do? And you know, and they're getting burned out. So maybe some people have been able to get into what they wanted to do, but I think there's a whole lot of people that are just in jobs, and that's what they think, then that's what life is supposed to be like.
Or maybe there's nothing wrong with the line of work they're in, but the fact that they define themselves as that and not as an opportunity to make a difference.
Yeah.
I mean, you can be an accountant, you can be my daughter was telling me about the trash collector that goes through her neighborhood, and how every one of the kids on the street is so excited when that truck goes by, and how he has given most of them a little trash truck, at some point or another. And I think, what about, that is like the quintessential dumped on job when you could just be a trash collector, I guess. That man, I don't know what his story is. Is he retired? Is he young? Is he whatever? I don't know. What I do know is he lives a day of purpose and a day of joy, and he makes a difference. So if my daughter's trash collector,
that creates happiness.
It creates a sense of, and they're all people. Those kids have a sense that the guy driving the truck is a human, is a person with a sense of purpose. And that right there is one of the best lessons I can think of, is that we show others how to live a deliberate life.
So all your children are grown, and
my youngest is 16.
So, and how many grandchildren do you have? Did you say
9 and counting? I'm expecting to have several more next year, because everybody's kind of at that place where they're talking about it. So
well, and so you have so much perspective on things. You can see things from so many different angles now, and I just think that is amazing. So I mean, do you help with your kids, with your grandkids?
I wouldn't be able to give a definitive yes or no. The grandkids, I mean, part of being a grandparent, here's the thing. For me, homeschool isn't about, it looks like school. It's a lifestyle. It's a vision. It's a value. So I have to say, yes, I do help with their homeschool, because when one of them comes up and I show them how to help me with my 1,000-piece puzzle, I'm helping them with homeschool. When one of them comes and I explain to them a word from a book that I'm reading, that's me helping with homeschool. Because it's all about,
what is homeschool, right?
Yes.
It's education. Well, I mean, it's education, it's life. It's not so much about the school as it is about home, and about,
exactly,
core from the beginning. That's the foundation. And then coming to love to learn and moving into that scholar phase because you still want to, because you don't hate education and you don't hate learning, right? So I guess if you could go back and and redo it, how would you, and maybe you've done this from the beginning, but what does a day in a first grader's life look like, for example? What would you say would be, I mean, I know there's so many answers, but
I actually wrote a pamphlet on this. It's called The Thomas Jefferson Education in Our Home, and was written when our oldest three were 8 and 7 and 6, I think. Might have been a little bit older.
yeah, and so you were right in that time.
Yeah. And you can get that on our website at tjn.org. But I think the easy answer is, and again, the phases of learning kind of talks about this. I like to have a routine that's a morning routine where we have kind of a rhythm that we follow. And it doesn't necessarily fit what the clock's doing, but there's a do this and then that kind of a sequence. And I would say that it's pretty, especially when, I don't know.
Sorry, what was that? Say that again. There was a little glitch.
I think it's pretty important that you have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. I have a homeschool mentor. She's a few years ahead.
In general.
Yeah. Yeah. But I have a homeschool mentor who's a few years ahead of me. And she told us once that you need to have 3 different plans for what a day looks like. There's the bare minimum, like unless I'm like passed out on the floor, this is what we're doing with my day, which is probably say family prayer and I don't know, maybe you don't get past that
every day, right? But yeah.
I don't, somebody else's, minimum. And you might have to redefine your minimum depending on a season of life. Maybe you do family prayer and you sing together, you do whatever you maybe have. We used to like to do the Pledge of Allegiance together, for example, and then maybe read together out of our family read aloud. That might be the very bare minimum of a day. And then there's a full-on day where you look at that, and those are the days where you're like, I'm such a good homeschooler. But you know what? Those days only happen like 1 in 10, literally. And if they happen more than that,
we're living life, right?
Yeah,
which is the beauty of it too. Because yes, it's beautiful, family life, and kids are learning so much.
Well, and I think if one of those highly academic, highly regimented, very full days happens more than 1 in 10, then you're missing out on a whole lot of other things that are literally more important than academics. Not because academics has so little importance, but because it doesn't take 10 days out of 10 to get it done. It literally only takes 1 day out of 10 to get it done. But the other things, the learning to explore, the learning how to deal with disappointment, the learning how to get past frustration, the learning how to build something out of boredom or to make do with something that wasn't working, the learning how to fix relationships, learning how to whatever. Those things are huge, and
those are things our society needs, and we are not doing very well in a lot of those, and knowing how to communicate and
again, remember that my minimum day does have prayer, song, scripture, reading aloud. I don't know what else. And there's probably an evening routine that happens as well. And then there's the middle.
Taking care of the baby, whatever. Yeah.
The mid ground. There's one that's like right somewhere in between those. And if you know whether you're having an A day, a B day, or a C day, you can use the right measuring stick for that day, not beat yourself up over something that was never going to happen. Never going to happen that day, whatever it was.
Because you can get really down on, think all their friends are probably learning a whole lot more or something like that. But are they really? Yes. And I remember all the things that I realized that I was missing as a child that my family was doing without me. And I lived on a ranch, and they were doing all the all the work outside and everything. And I was missing out on that because I was, sitting in four wall, within four walls, raising my hand. And, or, I mean, there were things that we did, but I wasn't really out living life, like I wanted to be. So
I have a brother-in-law and sister-in-law, my husband's brother's family. They do what they call farm school because he's been a professional agriculturalist and for, their whole married life. And those kids know how to do almost everything on a farm. And they would spend their evenings reading and discussing, and they would fit in the academics here and there. And I'll put those kids up against anybody's in terms of knowing history, understanding, human nature, knowing how to read, write, and arithmetic. They're as good as anybody. And yet they have so many skills in terms of, being able to run a business, being able to deal with really practical stuff like how to do shelter and food and
yeah, I know I missed out on a lot of that. We were there, in the summers and after school and things, but there was really a lot that, there's a lot that you miss if you're not living, like you go play store at school when actually you could just be going to the store and living and learning, not just learning about this is the policeman, let's color him, but actually seeing just there's the policeman right there, and there's, like just living normal life that way. But so now what about like, doing worksheets and things like that? Like sometimes kids like to do those kinds of things. What about that?
I mean, I look at worksheets like I look at coloring pages. They're fun sometimes. If it becomes like an assignment for every day, it doesn't make much sense to me because there are better ways to learn than worksheets. Worksheets can be good
Read and things.
or fun. Worksheets can reinforce certain ideas, but to my way of thinking, there's a whole learning approach that's a little bit more effective. When we get down to worksheets, someone has distilled it down to a checklist.
Mm-hmm. Well, you kind of need to do that in the classroom to make sure that everyone's getting, everything, right?
Yeah.
At least it's kind of been figured out somebody's figured that out, that's probably the best way.
But
to teach to the whole group.
Yeah, the checklist formula for me is not a great way to learn because it's too confining.
How can you write everything down?
Think about any particular subject. There's some things that you might want to say about music, but then you get into history of music, then you get into composers, then you get into different countries, then you get into, is it for children or is it for popular culture? Is it for, you
just
can't,
so much more rich.
Yeah, the whole learning is to me way more effective and so much more relevant. And when you do it that way, guess what happens? You never stay within the bounds of music or math or history. When you do whole learning, it veers into other topics constantly. You can't confine music as only music and not math. You can't confine history as only history and not geology.
Excuse me. Right. You can't, because they all meld together. That's how life is.
You can do it on a worksheet. You can do it on a worksheet.
You could break it apart into little pieces.
But there's just more. There's more. And that's why learning from the classics to me makes all the difference, because for me to become a classic in my heart, it has to have that kind of wholeness where it not only speaks to life on a farm, but how a family grows, or what to do when crisis hits, or that's what happens when you study from the classics, when you learn from the classics.
I love one of my very favorite things to do is to gather my children around me, and we just pull out books and whatever I feel inspired to do that day, and just having that time where we're learning together. And one topic leads into another topic, and we have a lot of conversations and ones that I'm really wanting to have with those kids, at that time. And it's just beautiful. I love to do it that way. Or when we're just all together in the kitchen, it gives that time where you can be talking about those important things rather than, okay, class, today we're going to learn about, you know,
Here are the
planting,
books, what you're learning.
but what about anxious mothers who are, like thinking about what should I be doing with my child who is, in the first grade, and I don't want them to get behind.
First of all, let me say, I don't typically use the terms for grades because it leads you exactly where you went with it, where a lot of people's minds go with it, which is there's a ahead and a behind. And both of those can be equally problematic. A child who's ahead, and I was ahead. I learned to read when I was, 3, 4. And, I was 3 when I learned to read. And because I was considered to be, precocious, a lot of my early years were defined by me living up to expectations. And I didn't have a real sense of who I was. I was a bundle of talents and not me. Whereas at the same time, there's another child who maybe doesn't have a, comfortably fit into a timeline, and they then become defined by being behind. When both of us are kind of just us. We don't have to be. I have 2 children who are dyslexic, and both of them are amazing, genius.
And they have they're geniuses in these other areas, right?
Well, and they're even genius in reading and in language arts. Turns out they are, like, my daughter has probably perfect recall of anything she hears. So audiobooks, she just knows everything. And my son is an amazing, mentor. He has, in fact, they both have really crazy insights into the way people think and how to change people's minds and hearts. He is so well read. He is like our science guy. He knows everything about science and history and philosophy and because he just goes everywhere. He's a amazingly educated individual. If he had been in the public school between the years of, say, 5 and 13, 14, when he really started to get some mastery in reading, I think he would have had a very different education, because his sense of who he was and what he was for would have been defined by not fitting in. While because he was at home, he literally never heard of the term dyslexic. I mean, he probably had heard, he didn't think of himself as dyslexic.
Yeah.
It took him until he was probably, we had a conversation maybe 2 years ago where he's like, Mom, I heard you say I was dyslexic. I'm not dyslexic. I said, son, you're dyslexic. And I explained, because when he was 19 years old, he was preparing to serve a mission where he needed to learn Portuguese. And I remember him writing home to me saying, Mom, it's the weirdest thing. It's like the letters kind of dance on the page. And I'm like, and I had sat him down before he left. And I said, you need to be prepared to advocate for yourself, because some people might misinterpret some of the ways that you learn as a disability, and just be prepared to say what you need and do what you need to do, because you're not disabled, you're fine. And by then he was reading fluently and reading with joy, but he had never had to fit a timeline or the pressure of a traditional classroom. And when you put him in that situation, guess what happened? All of the classic signs of dyslexia totally was there for him. And he didn't realize until I explained it all in that way. And he's like, oh, I guess I am dyslexic. But he didn't know. Mm-hmm. He just read on his time. We read to them constantly. He knew how to read. He just couldn't put it all together neurologically until when he hit puberty, which is the same thing with my daughter.
Yeah, a lot of kids,
once they hit puberty,
dyslexia, don't learn to read until later, and you just can keep trying to pound it in, and that's that doesn't work. You might as well let them be their own person and
Well,
do.
I will say it's super important that you make sure they can see. I
Yes.
had one daughter who struggled for, she did okay, but not great. Not as I would have expected of her, if I had no expectations of her being behind. I literally just assumed that she was dyslexic. I'm not going to lie. I just thought she had the same thing going on as her older brother. She was in her tween years when I finally, for some reason, I think it was because her younger sister, and that's what it was, her younger sister who is dyslexic, I thought, I wonder if having some glasses might help her. And she has another sister who has some severe vision issues. So I just took them all in at once. And turned out that she really needed glasses. And so here she'd just been struggling just a little bit for probably years. And I had no idea.
Oh,
I mean, I'm like flat-headed.
make sure they can see.
Make sure they can hear. Just some basic stuff. And, there are other things that can make it difficult. In general, I find that when you cover your basic bases, having a learning rich environment is the best remedy for almost anything.
Yeah.
Because my kids were able to discover their own workarounds such that they don't have a sense of being different or disabled. In fact, if you were to compare them outside of any kind of academic scenario with somebody else, I think you would think that they kind of displayed as more intelligent, more educated than somebody who was neurotypically normal, who was developmentally, who was processing normal.
Yes, because it really can be a label also that, if you are kind of labeled as you have dyslexia and that is your main label, a lot of times uh, you know, you kind of think, oh, well, I guess I must not be very smart, when the opposite is true because your mind is just wired in a different way.
I'll tell
And
you,
so
there's
many.
so many good moms of dyslexic kids who tell me the same thing that I've discovered, and that is that they come with a kind of special bundle of gifts. And that is not to say, that is not just a positive mental attitude. I mean, for real, kids with dyslexia very often display some hyper intelligent, hyper intuitive talents. And there's some of them are quite common to see as if it's part of that package. So that's kind of cool.
Yes, interesting. Yeah, I
Rachel
definitely.
asked me what core phase look like, and we should probably address that because I know that was pretty important to you. For me, core phase is a lot of shadowing mama, where they work with you, they play with you, that there's time where they learn to do what you're doing with you, not necessarily to your standard, but just as part of their play, they're being with you. A lot of read aloud time, a lot of read aloud, singing, counting, telling stories. It's
Wonderful. Like it's great to be able to have I mean, isn't it, to be able to have your children with you and be able to work with them and be there for all these moments. I
Well,
think.
and when you don't think of them as a certain grade, when you really internalize that this core phase has a pretty rigorous curriculum already with the learning right and wrong and good and bad and true and false and who am I and what is God to me. And when you see that curriculum, it's like reading can wait a minute. If they learn to read on their own, and a lot of kids do and will, fine. But to really drill it during those early years can be a distraction from the things that really matter. And not only that, but kids that learn to read later often read more quickly and with less things like subvocalization and more correct inflection and so forth, because they're not learning it as a rote skill of memorization. They're learning it more as a whole language thing. There are kids like for me who have a high language aptitude that learning to read is very easy and natural. There are kids that have a more inclination toward being physical or toward being scientific or toward whatever, who might not have that as their first processing language, who learn perfectly well when they're 8 or 10 to read and
Or even 12. but
Yeah.
that's just not their what
Well,
they're
yeah,
focused
I
on when
only
they're.
of all of my genius kids, I've only had 2 that learned to read before they were 10.
Mhm.
And that's 8 kids. And one of them has multiple disabilities. We don't know. He might read. We don't know. He can't really be assessed very well. But it's literally easier.
Because that wasn't necessarily your focus. They were learning other things too.
Well, they were getting read to constantly, and I do in our blog talk about how to teach a child to read organically. It's not that it's ignored. It's just not drilled
Yeah.
because
Because you can drill it and they're still not going to get it. I've drilled it to my kids in the past, and those who are going to get it, and those who aren't, you can just keep drilling it and spend your whole time doing that. And what's the beauty
well,
in
and not only are they not learning to read, they are learning some other stuff that you don't wish they would learn. Like,
yeah.
I can't learn unless somebody is making me, or I'm slow, or I don't enjoy reading, or I don't enjoy learning. Those are the lessons they're taking away from that. When
Mhm.
literally, when they do it in their own time and in their own way, not only do they not have those, that baggage, but they actually enjoy it. And
Yeah.
they come to it so easily. I remember, I've taught biblical Hebrew for many years, and watching these students, several hundred of them over my career, maybe 1,000, I don't know, who had to take on an entirely different alphabet that starts out looking like bugs on a page, and a lot of sounds that are new to them and a little bit challenging to make with the mouth that's only spoken American English. Watching these students inside of 7 days' time get to where they could read out loud and understand things that are spoken to them.
Mhm.
7 days. I only had 2 exceptions in all of those hundreds of students. One of them was an old lady who literally didn't pay attention the whole time. She was going, "Oh, I'm too old for this. I can't do this." Just had this complex. She was so afraid of failing that she prepared everyone else for her failure. And the other one was a teenager who her parents forced her to be there and she had no interest whatsoever. So anybody who gave any attention to what we were doing, and I will say it was sort of an innovative process that I used. It was inside of a week, they could read and write and understand. And people say, "Well, sure, but that's easy. They're older." And I'm like, that was my point.
Mhm.
It's easier when
Right,
they're older.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I know, I could read before I went to school. And my parents both read to me, and I kind of it was kind of following along, just what they were reading on the page. I did have where I was, I learned some phonics and things, but just really it wasn't, it was just really very simply, here's your ABCs and and things. But I could read because my parents were reading to me. But and so in our home, I've read a whole lot to our children, and and all. But when the children that I have drilled and that haven't, that's not been something that has come easily to them, especially at an early age when their minds haven't been ready for it, and try to drill it. I've done more damage than I have good when I've done that,
And they
because.
probably came to it pretty good at right about 9.5 or 10. Am I right?
Well, I have one that I have a couple actually that the drilling just didn't help. But I'd read to them a whole lot. And sometimes there's just everyone's minds work in different ways. And you'll have that just thankfully you can work with a child one-on-one and help them to go ahead and to learn that.
Well, and you
But
don't wait around for them to read as if that were the single most important thing in
yeah.
education. You get
I've
on it,
kind of done
you
that
learn
before.
other
I've
things.
kind of waited around and wasted time drilling reading when their minds were not ready for it yet. And we could
But
have
they
been
would
doing
have been
a whole lot of other
delighted by
things.
by fables. They would have been delighted by mental arithmetic. They would have been delighted by, I don't know, different things for
And
different
reading
kids.
a whole lot more, yes, and going out and having field trips and yes, and just going out and seeing things a whole lot more. And we did those things, but I just think there was some wasted time. There's been some wasted time there where I've just been trying to help them to, to by drilling them and things. So, where it could have been different. And they had different interests, and sometimes they wouldn't have it either, and they were out, they were outside. Their attention was done, and it was like, nope, I'm done. So, and eventually, they learn to read and they learn to write, but they're out there doing their thing that makes them happy and helps to make a difference in the world. So, well, Rachel, I really, really appreciate you coming on and being on here with me today, and for sharing. You just have so much to share. Your wealth of information. And would you tell us where everyone can find you?
Yes, absolutely. We have a Facebook group called Leadership Education Homeschool Discussion, and I moderate it personally. I'm there every single day. I'm delighted to answer questions, but the cool thing is it's not just me. There are hundreds, thousands of others like you, like me, who share the value of family education. And you not only get my take on, what would be good for this or what should I do with that, but there are others who have a different wealth of experience. And so I recommend that to you to come join us. Also,
I'll link that down below on the videos. So
okay.
You can go in and get the link there.
Right. Our website is tjed.org. That's tjed.org, not com.org. And there you'll be able to visit and get our free 3-video series to kind of give you an introduction to leadership education. What's it all about? What are the key points? What does it mean for you? How do you transition either as a new homeschooler or as a homeschooler who's feeling like you want to change? Thriving. You're not feeling that delight. You're not feeling that harmony. That's what I'm here for. Please let us help. And, we've got the shop there where you can look at the different resources. Like the book you held up is available there at Thomas Jefferson Education. The other book that I referenced, Phases of Learning, also you can find there. And let me just encourage you to look at that 3-video series, get signed up for our newsletter, and there's some freebies that come with that. So love to hear from you.
Show you how to do it and what it looks like,
Yep.
what's being talked about in the book, like how to do it. Yes. Yeah, so is that kind of what this the video series is that way?
The 3-video series does explain some basics about TJ Ed, explains what to do to kind of do a family reset if things aren't going well. And well, I'll let you go discover them. They're short, they're like 20 minutes long each. So you could do them in succession and be done in an hour, or you can just save, digest one and share it with a family member. That, like I say, it's free. And when you sign up for those, it will automatically sign you up for our newsletter. If you don't want the newsletter, you're free to unsubscribe. There's always a footer in the email.
And how great to be getting that.
And we, of course,
bit of help every newsletter as it comes out. Yeah. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for all that you and Oliver have done for our family, and for helping me to know so much more about what an amazing education can actually be like, instead of just following status quo. I'm really grateful for you for helping me to have the recipes, to know how to make these fabulous, I guess, meals for my family, and to be able to work with my family and each of my children individually. So
thank you so much for having me, and Godspeed on this great work you're doing. And I encourage your listeners to follow closely, because your bright spirit is such an encouragement. And if there's any way that I can be a blessing to you, I'm right here. Come, let me help.
Thank you for being here and for being out there and for helping all of these families. Rachel is definitely someone that you are going to want to, you're going to want to get in her world. And so Thank you again, Rachel, for being here.
All right.